My wife's family pushed me too far, and they weren't ready for what I did next. I'm a 32-year-old man. And for most of my marriage, I've been navigating an exhausting relationship with my wife's family, particularly her overbearing father and two nosy brothers. It feels like a never-ending battle to assert my boundaries while also trying to maintain peace. And honestly, I'm at my wit's end. When I first married my wife, I thought her family's involvement in our lives was just enthusiasm. My wife, who's a kind and loving partner, assured me that her dad and brothers were just a little over the top but meant well. Over time though, their behavior started to feel less like enthusiasm and more like control. My father-in-law never misses an opportunity to undermine me, whether it's at family dinners, holiday gatherings, or even casual phone calls. My cooking isn't authentic enough. My career isn't stable. And apparently, my fashion sense is questionable. And that's just the start. What makes it worse is that he completely disregards the concept of boundaries. Early in our marriage, I'd be startled by the sound of his knocking. Always unannounced at our front door. It didn't matter if it was Sunday morning or late at night. He acted as if he had the right to drop by whenever he wanted. And if I dared to mention that we needed a heads up before he came over, he'd laugh it off or say, "Oh, I'm family. I don't need an invitation." My brothers-in-law, on the other hand, are like his shadow. They back him up on everything, creating a united front that's impossible to penetrate. They're constantly gossiping in their family group chats where I'm conveniently excluded. And sometimes I'll catch wind of what's being said through mutual friends. Spoiler alert, it's never anything nice. The incident that finally pushed me to start questioning everything happened recently. My wife and I went on a short vacation. A much-needed break from the chaos. And when we came back, I almost didn't recognize our living room. My father-in-law had decided to surprise us by redecorating it. The furniture was rearranged, new curtains were hung, and he'd even painted an accent wall in a color I hated. He'd apparently roped my brothers-in-law into helping him, and they'd made a day out of it. When I confronted him, his response was as dismissive as ever. He said, "I was just trying to help. Your living room needed some personality." My wife tried to mediate, but instead of taking my side, she shrugged it off, saying he probably thought he was doing something nice. I couldn't believe it. It wasn't about the living room. It was about the complete disregard for our space and our autonomy. The fallout didn't stop there. My father-in-law started spinning his version of the story to the rest of the family, painting me as ungrateful and controlling. Soon after, my brothers-in-law began posting cryptic messages on social media about toxic people and drama kings, which were clearly aimed at me. It was exhausting to see these little digs pop up on my feed, but I decided not to respond. I thought maybe if I ignored it, things would eventually settle down, but of course they didn't. Not long after the living room debacle, my father-in-law invited himself over for dinner, and he didn't come alone. He brought two of his friends, people I'd never met, and announced that he thought we could all get to know each other. I was blindsided and scrambling to put together enough food while trying not to lose my cool. After dinner, I told him firmly but politely that we'd appreciate it if he gave us a heads up before visiting in the future. He smiled, nodded, and ignored me completely. The next week, he showed up unannounced again, this time with a pie he'd baked. When I reminded him of our conversation about calling ahead, he brushed it off, saying, "Oh, I didn't think you'd mind. It's just a pie." My wife, ever the peacekeeper, tried to smooth things over, telling me he meant well and didn't understand why I was so upset. I started to feel like I was living in a parallel universe where everyone else was fine with this madness except for me. The lack of support from my wife was the hardest part. She'd tell me she understood my frustrations. But when push came to shove, she'd always side with her dad to keep the peace. It left me feeling isolated, like I was fighting this battle alone. Every attempt to set boundaries was met with resistance or outright defiance. I began to question whether our marriage could survive this dynamic. It's not that I didn't love my wife, I do, but her unwillingness to stand up to her family was eroding the trust and partnership we built. That's when I decided enough was enough. I wasn't going to keep living like this, constantly on edge and waiting for the next intrusion or passive-aggressive comment. I started devising a plan to regain control of my home, my marriage, and my peace of mind. If my wife wasn't going to stand up for us, I would. This wasn't just about setting boundaries anymore. It was about reclaiming my life from the chaos her family had brought into it. And this time, I wasn't backing down. Update 1. I sat my wife down one evening after work, determined to have a serious conversation. I laid everything out, how her father and brothers were interfering in our lives, how exhausting it was to constantly fend off their overbearing behavior, and how it was starting to take a toll on our marriage. She listened, nodding occasionally, but when I pressed her about confronting her family, she hesitated. She mumbled something about not wanting to create unnecessary drama, but she eventually promised to talk to them. I wasn't convinced, but I decided to give her the chance to step up. A few days later, my father-in-law showed up at our house unannounced again. He was holding a tray of cookies and smiling like nothing had happened. When I opened the door, he cheerfully claimed he'd forgotten about the new rule to call ahead. I stood my ground and told him he couldn't come in without prior notice. His expression shifted immediately, and he raised his voice, calling me disrespectful and saying I was keeping his daughter away from her family. I calmly repeated that he needed to call before visiting and shut the door. He didn't leave. Instead, he sat on the porch, muttering loudly about how ungrateful I was. When my wife came home that evening, she found him still sitting there. She looked annoyed. Not at him, but at me. She told me I'd escalated the situation unnecessarily and that I should have just let him in. I was stunned. It was like everything we talked about a few days earlier had flown out the window. Feeling cornered, I started keeping a record of every interaction I had with her father and brothers. I figured if it ever came down to it, I'd at least have proof of how far they were pushing things. Not long after, I found out through a mutual friend that my father-in-law was planning a family meeting to address my behavior. I wasn't invited, of course. My wife didn't tell me about it either. I only found out when the friend mentioned it in passing. When I confronted her, she admitted she'd been invited but didn't see the harm in attending. She promised it was just a chance for everyone to clear the air. That didn't make me feel any better. After the meeting, her brother started sending me snide texts implying that the family had unanimously decided I was the problem. The next blow came when I overheard my wife on the phone with her father. He casually mentioned a family dinner he was planning at our house. He hadn't asked me or even told me. He was just organizing it like it was his own home. When I brought it up with my wife, she shrugged it off and said it wasn't a big deal. She suggested we just go along with it to avoid more tension. That was the last straw. I called my father-in-law directly and told him the dinner was cancelled. He was furious, accusing me of trying to divide the family. He threatened to cut off contact with his daughter if I didn't stop being so controlling. The fallout from that confrontation was immediate. My wife came home from work visibly upset. She told me her father had called her in tears saying I was ruining their relationship. She looked genuinely disappointed and said I was being too rigid. I didn't have the energy to argue anymore. I simply told her that if she wasn't willing to enforce boundaries, I'd have to take more drastic measures to protect my peace. She didn't say anything after that, but the tension in the house was palpable. I knew things were going to get worse before they got better, but I was done compromising my sanity for the sake of keeping the peace. Update 2. After the fallout from the cancelled dinner, I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I told my wife we needed to have a serious conversation. I didn't sugarcoat it. I gave her an ultimatum. Either she set clear boundaries with her father and brothers, or I would have to consider more drastic measures, including separating. She looked shocked but agreed to have a meeting with her father to address the situation. I made it clear I expected her to stand firm this time. A few days later, my wife invited her father over to discuss boundaries. I stayed upstairs, not wanting to derail the conversation. I could hear his dismissive tone even through the walls. He brushed off her concerns, saying, "This is just how our family is. He's the one who needs to adjust." When my wife mentioned my frustration, he accused me of being too sensitive and claimed I was trying to isolate her from her family. After he left, my wife admitted she hadn't gotten through to him. I wasn't surprised but told her this was her chance to show me she was serious about supporting me. The next morning, I woke up to find my social media flooded with vague posts from her brothers. They wrote things like, "Some people really don't understand the value of family and sad to see selfishness tear people apart." Though they didn't name me directly, it was obvious who they were talking about. I decided to block my father-in-law and brothers-in-law on every platform to avoid the drama. That didn't stop them, though. I started hearing from extended family members who had been contacted by my father-in-law, urging them to talk sense into me. Some of them called or messaged, telling me I needed to be more understanding. My wife, overwhelmed by the escalating tension, began avoiding the topic altogether. Anytime I brought it up, she'd change the subject or tell me she didn't want to fight. It was clear I was on my own, so I started researching my legal options. I contacted a lawyer to understand my rights regarding the house, just in case things took a turn for the worse. Knowing I had a plan gave me a sense of control, even if it was just a small step. The situation came to a head one afternoon when I heard a strange noise outside. I looked out the window and saw my father-in-law standing on the porch with a locksmith. He was trying to have the locks changed, claiming he had every right to enter his daughter's house whenever he wanted. I immediately called the police. When they arrived, he burst into tears, claiming I was treating him like a criminal. The locksmith quickly left, and the officers explained to him that he had no legal right to access our home without permission. He finally left, but not without making a scene. When my wife came home, she was livid. She accused me of overreacting and embarrassing her father. I reminded her that he had crossed every possible line, but she didn't want to hear it. She said I should have called her first instead of involving the police. I told her I'd had enough and that if she didn't start standing up for me, I would have no choice but to take matters into my own hands. I decided to take a week off work to clear my head and come up with a plan. During that time, her brothers started sending passive-aggressive messages to her, calling me controlling and saying they didn't recognize her anymore. I ignored them, but I could tell their words were getting to her. She started spending more time at work, coming home late, and avoiding me altogether. While cleaning the house one day, I found a spare key hidden in a drawer. It didn't take long for me to realize what had been happening. My father-in-law had been using this key to let himself into the house whenever he pleased. I confronted my wife, who admitted she'd given him the key a long time ago and never asked for it back. Furious, I changed all the locks that same day. I told her that if she wasn't willing to enforce boundaries, I would. The next time my father-in-law tried to show up unannounced, he found himself locked out. When he called my wife to complain, she told him there was nothing she could do about it. I could tell she was finally starting to understand how serious I was. I warned her that if things didn't change, separating might be the only way to protect my peace. For the first time, she didn't argue. Instead, she promised to figure out how to fix things. I wasn't holding my breath, but at least it was a start. Update 3. The situation escalated when my father-in-law called a family lawyer. He claimed he had rights to his daughter's house despite having no legal ownership or leasehold. The lawyer advised him that he had no standing, but the fact that he went that far spoke volumes about his intentions. I decided to protect myself further by officially securing ownership documents in my name. The process took a few weeks, but by the end, I had legal proof that our home was mine as much as my wife's. This step gave me a sense of control and security. The aftermath of that meeting was predictably dramatic. My brothers-in-law took to social media, accusing me of turning their sister against them. They posted cryptic messages about toxic spouses and lost siblings, which mutual acquaintances quickly picked up on. Meanwhile, my father-in-law started calling relatives to spread lies about me, claiming I was manipulative and trying to isolate my wife from her family. It was exhausting, but I knew I had to stay focused. To protect myself, I began compiling evidence of their harassment. I saved text messages, voicemails, and screenshots of social media posts. This wasn't just for my own peace of mind. It was insurance in case things escalated further. My wife, to her credit, started cutting back on visits with her family. She avoided their calls and skipped a few gatherings, which was a significant shift. It seemed she was finally starting to see how their behavior was affecting our marriage. But then my father-in-law pulled his most dramatic stunt yet. He staged an intervention at a family gathering we didn't attend, inviting mutual friends and distant relatives to air his grievances. He accused me of tearing the family apart, painting himself as the victim of my control issues. A few of the attendees later reached out to me, expressing concern and asking for my side of the story. I calmly explained the situation, providing evidence of his behavior. To my surprise, some of them sided with me, admitting they had noticed similar patterns in the past. The turning point came when my wife finally defended me publicly. At another family event where her father tried to air his grievances again, she shut him down. She told him that she supported me and that his behavior was the real issue. It was the first time she had stood up to him in front of the family, and it shifted the power dynamic completely. Her father was furious, threatening to disown her unless she divorced me. She told him that if he couldn't respect our marriage, then she would have no choice but to distance herself from him. The fallout was immediate. My father-in-law stopped speaking to my wife, and my brothers-in-law followed his lead. It was a temporary estrangement. But for the first time, I felt like we were on the same page. My wife's decision to prioritize our marriage over her family was a turning point. And while I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, I finally felt like we were taking control of our lives. Update 4. The rift in the family became undeniable after my wife stood up for me. My father-in-law refused to attend any family events if I was present, making it clear he wanted no part of my life. This caused a divide in the extended family. Some supported his stance while others stayed neutral or quietly sided with us. My brothers-in-law tried to mediate by suggesting compromises, but their efforts only worsened the situation. They constantly sided with their father, insisting I should apologize and make things right. Despite the tension, my wife and I began attending events without my father-in-law. For the first time, we enjoyed a sense of freedom at family gatherings. Without him overshadowing everything, I had the chance to bond with a few extended family members. They admired my strength and even shared stories of how controlling my father-in-law had been in the past. Their support was a welcome surprise and made the gatherings more enjoyable. A few weeks later, my wife and I received a letter from my father-in-law. He apologized for his behavior but didn't take responsibility for anything specific. It was more of a sorry if you were offended letter than a genuine apology. My wife thought it was a step forward and wanted to meet him to discuss reconciliation. I wasn't as convinced but agreed to a meeting, cautiously hopeful that things might improve. The meeting started on a civil note but quickly turned tense. My father-in-law apologized again, but it was clear he didn't fully grasp the boundaries we had set. He made offhand comments about how he was only trying to help and didn't understand why I took everything so personally. I reiterated our rules for future interactions: no unannounced visits, no meddling in our decisions, and no undermining me in public or private. I also made it clear that any overstepping would have consequences. He nodded along but looked irritated, as if he was agreeing just to end the conversation. My brothers-in-law, meanwhile, were begrudgingly following suit. They stopped posting cryptic messages on social media but remained cold toward me. Their interactions were limited to polite exchanges, which I was fine with. I wasn't looking for a friendship with them, just respect. My wife, for her part, consistently enforced the boundaries we had set. Whenever her family pushed back, she stood firm, proving that she was fully on my side. But my father-in-law wasn't done testing us. One evening, he showed up uninvited, claiming he just wanted to drop something off. My wife intercepted him at the door and firmly told him he couldn't come in without prior notice. He tried to argue, but she didn't budge. Eventually, he left, clearly upset, but it was a turning point. For the first time, he realized that the rules applied to him too and that my wife wasn't going to let him walk all over us anymore. After that incident, things began to settle down. My wife and I finally felt a sense of peace in our lives. The constant drama had lessened, and we started to rebuild trust in our relationship. One evening, she thanked me for my patience and resilience throughout the ordeal. It felt like we were finally on the same team, and it was a relief to know that our hard work was paying off. To celebrate our newfound independence, we started planning a vacation, a trip just for the two of us. It was something we hadn't done in years, and the idea of escaping everything, even temporarily, felt liberating. Around the same time, we received another letter from my father-in-law. This one was different. It was heartfelt, apologetic, and free of excuses. He admitted to overstepping and expressed a genuine desire to make amends. We decided to take things slow. Reconciliation was possible, but it would be on our terms. For now, we were focused on enjoying the peace we had worked so hard to achieve. Update 5. Looking back on everything we went through, it's hard to believe how far we've come. The journey wasn't easy, but it transformed our marriage in ways I never imagined. My father-in-law and brothers-in-law, once constant sources of stress, are now distant but respectful. They've learned to respect the boundaries we set. And while our relationships may never be close, the peace we've gained is worth it. My wife has been my greatest supporter throughout this transformation. Once hesitant and afraid of confrontation, she's grown into someone who prioritizes our marriage above all else. She stands firm when it comes to boundaries and doesn't let her family's guilt-tripping tactics sway her anymore. It's a relief to know we're truly a team now, something that felt impossible not too long ago. A few months after the chaos settled, we got the happiest news: we were expecting our first child. This added a new layer to our dynamic with her family. Predictably, my father-in-law reached out cautiously, expressing a desire to be part of his grandchild's life. I made it clear that his involvement would be on our terms. There would be no unannounced visits, no undermining my parenting decisions, and no drama. Surprisingly, he respected the rules. He's been careful not to overstep. And while I remain cautious, his effort hasn't gone unnoticed. My brothers-in-law have also started to rebuild their relationship with me. Though it's been a slow process, we've had a few civil conversations at family gatherings. And while the trust isn't fully there yet, it feels like progress. Extended family members who once took my father-in-law's side have also started to shift their support toward us. They've seen the effort I've made to keep the peace and have started recognizing the patterns that were at play before. Through all of this, I realized how many people struggle with similar issues in their families. I started mentoring others in online forums and local support groups, sharing my experiences and the lessons I learned about setting boundaries and standing firm. It's been incredibly rewarding to help others navigate situations like mine, and it's given me a sense of purpose beyond just resolving my own family drama. My father-in-law, to his credit, has shown consistent effort to mend his ways. He's far from perfect, but his behavior has improved significantly. We've reached a tentative truce, and while I'll always keep my guard up, I'm cautiously optimistic about the future. One of the most satisfying steps in our journey was renovating our home. We turned it into a true sanctuary, a space that finally feels like ours. We updated the living room he once redecorated without permission, transforming it into a reflection of our style. Every time I walk through the door, I feel a sense of pride in how far we've come. One evening, as we were finishing the nursery for our baby, my wife turned to me and apologized. She admitted she should have stood up for me sooner and promised that she would never let anyone come between us again. It was a heartfelt moment, and though I had already forgiven her, hearing her say it meant the world. As I sit here reflecting on everything, I feel a deep sense of triumph and gratitude. Boundaries didn't just transform our marriage, they gave me back control over my life. It's a lesson I'll carry with me forever, and one I hope to pass on to our child. Life isn't perfect, but it's ours. And that's more than enough for me.